President Reinhardt, Terrace, thank you very much indeed for your warm introduction, Dan. It's always a great pleasure to come to Brandeis, and I do that, I'm happy to say, on many occasions. And I'm really grateful to Brandeis University for making this occasion possible, and in particular I'm grateful to Ambassador Gold for agreeing to participate in this discussion. One thing I'm sure about that Ambassador Gold and I will agree on, and that is our desire for peace and justice for all of the people of the Middle East. It is to Israel's credit that it is concerned, and I think the overwhelming majority of the citizens are concerned, about many of the accusations in the Gaza report. Israel is a democracy in which many of its citizens are committed to human rights and the rule of law. Sadly, as appears from our report, the same cannot be said of Gaza. They are neither able nor at the moment willing to react in a similar way. Even then, the reports coming out of Gaza indicate a suggestion of domestic investigations with international assistance, and that, of course, would be an unusual way forward in the region. I'm looking forward to this discussion with Ambassador Gold, and I hope and anticipate that we'll get down to substance and avoid much of the rhetoric and personal attacks, ad hominem attacks that have marked much of the discussions on the Gaza report to date. Those personal and very unpleasant attacks, I regret, have masked and obfuscated rather than made easier to understand important issues raised in the report. At the outset, I would like to address and hopefully get out of the way 4 core and fundamental issues. The first is a record of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. It is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, and it was established in March 2006 as a successor to the Commission on Human Rights, which had been heavily criticized for having countries in its membership with poor human rights. Unfortunately, some members of the new council, the Human Rights Council, continue to be states with poor human rights records. Their participation, and indeed their leadership of the Human Rights Council, threatened the legitimacy of that body as a voice for human rights. The leadership of the United Nations to openly acknowledge that the Human Rights Council focuses a disproportionate amount of attention on Israel. The former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, criticized the Council, I quote, for disproportionate focus on violations by Israel while neglecting other parts of the world such as Darfur, which he referred to as a far graver crisis. He later added that Israel should not be given a free pass, but that the Council should give the same attention to grave violations in other states as well. I fully agree with those views, and I have spoken out on many occasions over the last few years against the unfair and partial treatment meted out to Israel by the Human Rights Council. That having been said, it should be acknowledged that at its most recent session in Geneva, the Council adopted appropriate resolutions on the human rights situations in Burma, Somalia, Honduras, and Cambodia, and unanimously supported resolutions on freedom of expression, migrants' rights, HIV/AIDS, and access to medicines. It is disappointing that the Human Rights Council refused a request from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, to investigate war crimes allegedly committed in the war in Sri Lanka. It is a matter for regret that the international media too does not pay sufficient attention to these and other human rights crises. Although the Bush administration decided not to seek a seat on the Human Rights Council, that policy was reversed by the Obama administration, and the United States seat was taken up earlier this year. This is a very positive step. We need the United States to be a leader on human rights and to be the leader in reforming the Human Rights Council. The second issue I want to address is the mandate of the fact-finding mission on Gaza, which I had. On this, there is the repeated allegation that the mandate I accepted was biased against Israel. That is not true. The original mandate, contained in a January resolution of the Human Rights Council, was indeed biased against Israel. It referred and called for an investigation only of violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law committed by Israel. When I was approached, that was the mandate, and I rejected it. I rejected it for the same reason that Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland and former High Commissioner for Human Rights, rejected it. Since the report was published, Mary Robinson has publicly supported the mandate given to me and has objected to her refusal of the original mandate being used to attack the mandate under which we operate. Let me tell you the story of the new mandate, or the mandate that I accepted. I refused the biased mandate, and I thought that was the end of my participation. But fortunately or unfortunately, with hindsight, I was asked to come and meet with the then President of the Human Rights Council, the Nigerian Ambassador Martin Uramoibi. I've never met him. We immediately took a liking to each other. He's a very warm personality. And he said to me in his office in Geneva, how would you word an even-handed mandate? And I told him I would word an even-handed mandate to make it clear that the investigation was into human rights violations and humanitarian law violations committed by all sides relevant to Operation Cast Lead. He said, would you write it out for me? I wrote it out, a very rough version, gave it to him, and he said, well, if you're prepared to do it, that's your mandate. As President, I have to appoint the mission, and I'm sure that the Human Rights Council, if I put it to them, would accept it. Well, it was very difficult to refuse a mandate that I had, in fact, written for myself. This mandate represented, let me say, the first time in the history of the Human Rights Council or its predecessor that there had been an even-handed mandate in respect of the Middle East and in particular of Israel. The mandate especially, and I quote, is to investigate all violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law that might have been committed at any time in the context of the military operations that were conducted in Gaza during the period 27 December 2008 and 18 January 2009, whether before, during, or after. It appeared to me, and it was really my sincere hope, and I would add expectation, that Israel would seize this opportunity of an even-handed mandate and cooperate with the mission. This was the first opportunity for Israel to use the United Nations fact-finding mission to look into the issues that concerned it. When the mandate was reported by President Uramoibi to a plenary session of the Human Rights Council, there were no objections voiced at all by a single member. But what is more important, when the Human Rights Council adopted our report in September, 2 months ago, it adopted the whole report, and that included findings we made that Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups had committed serious war crimes against Israel and possibly crimes against humanity. And this was the first time. It was the first time that there was a report that made those allegations, and obviously the first time that they've been accepted by the Human Rights Council. It included also the first description in a United Nations document of the details of the terror that has been suffered by the residents of southern Israel, such as those who live in the city of Sderot, and all others who live within the range of the rockets and mortars that have been fired in their many thousands over a number of years from Gaza into southern Israel. We, unfortunately, were not allowed to visit southern Israel. We were not allowed, our mission was not allowed by the Israeli government to come into Israel, so we couldn't go to southern Israel where we would have liked to have met there with the victims and to go to the West Bank to meet there too, to investigate aspects relevant to Operation Last Leg. Before my appointment was announced, I pleaded with the Israeli ambassador to meet with me. I said that I wanted to discuss with him how we should go about implementing our mandate. What were the issues of interest to Israel? I said we were prepared to go at short notice to Jerusalem to meet with the Israeli government, with the Israeli Defense Force, to discuss and seek advice from them on the implementation of our mandate. The response I got from the ambassador, firstly, he wasn't prepared to meet with me because he said he had no authority from Jerusalem, which I found disappointing. But I then got a written response to my letter to the effect that while there was no aspersion made towards me, that the Israeli government was not prepared to cooperate with the mission appointed by the Human Rights Council. And he referred to the mandate. I responded, again pleading for the Israeli government to reconsider its view. I said the mandate to which it referred is not the mandate I've accepted, and I gave my assurance that we would look at all issues that were relevant to both sides in the Middle East. It took some weeks. There was no response to my request for a reconsideration. And I followed it up with a personal plea to Prime Minister Netanyahu, offering to come at short notice to meet with him, any members of his government, any members of the Israel Defense Force that could assist us in implementing the mission. Some 2 months went by before I received a response to both my letters requesting a reconsideration and the letter to the Prime Minister in which it was reiterated that there would be no cooperation. The views of the Israeli Minister of Welfare, Isaac Herzog, on Israel's attitude towards the mission was reported in Haaretz on October the 28th of this year, not many days, in fact last week. Haaretz said the Welfare Minister went on to lament Israel's failure to cooperate with the Goldstone Commission, saying that it was a mistake. Quote, there was a systematic failure in Israel's handling of the issue up until the actual report was made public, he said. And I couldn't agree more. The third issue I want to get out of the way is what the mandate included and what it did not include. The mandate of the mission's task was to investigate violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. For those of you who are not used to the terminology, humanitarian law, it really refers to the laws applying to armed conflict, what used in the old days to be called the laws of war. We considered that this required us to consider the manner in which both sides had used military force, and not the justification or otherwise of having resorted to military force. I've publicly stated on many occasions that Israel has the right under international law not only to protect its citizens from rocket and mortar attacks from Gaza, but it has a clear duty to do so. Therefore, under international law, Israel was fully justified in using military force to that end. I doubt that Ambassador Gold will disagree with me on this point. Our mandate did not call on us to evaluate the right to use military force. That was taken as a given, and the issue with which we were concerned was whether the manner in which that military force was used was consistent with international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict. Many of those who have attacked the report raise the issue of Israel's legitimate right to defend itself. Let me be absolutely clear on this. International law allows and indeed requires Israel to defend its citizens against terror attacks. And there's not a word in the report that could be interpreted in any other way. As I've already said, the mission found in unequivocal terms that Hamas and other armed militants committed serious war crimes against the people of southern Israel. The report contains, as I've said to the best of my knowledge, the first international analysis of the terror suffered by the people of southern Israel. And from the interviews we had, we, the United Nations, flew witnesses to Geneva to give public testimony, and we conducted nearly 50 telephone discussions, because we couldn't go there, with leaders and witnesses in southern Israel. And the report sets out the effect these rockets have had on cities like Sderot and Ashkelon. People have left the area. It's affected the economy. It's affected employment. But more importantly, it's terrorized women and children every day of their life. It's not pleasant to live in a situation where your children go to school and get less than 45 seconds notice of rockets coming at them from Gaza. And that's set out in chapter 24 of the report in some detail. And it led us to the conclusion that the militants firing these rockets have committed serious war crimes and possibly crimes against humanity. After our report was released, the mayor of Sderot sent me an email asking how we could not have come to see the destruction and the terror in his town, and he invited me to do so. I was surprised that he wasn't aware that our mission had requested permission to visit Sderot and other cities in southern Israel, but that had been refused to us by his own government. I explained to him in response what I've explained to you, and I've accepted his invitation the next time in Israel to visit Sderot. The fourth issue is that our investigation was not a judicial or even a quasi-judicial procedure. We expressly did not apply a criminal law standard of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In this regard, I was misunderstood by a journalist from the Forward, to whom I explained, thought carefully, that our report would not constitute evidence in a court of law. It's a report, it's hearsay evidence, and that the findings we made for the purpose of any future proceedings would have to be investigated afresh. And I explained that that's specifically why we called for independent investigations, domestic investigations in Israel and in Gaza. In that context, I stated that if in appropriate criminal proceedings the findings we had made were not established, that would not cause me a problem, and that remains my position. Let me turn now to the substance. We referred in our report to what has become known as the Dahia Doctrine. It was explained in March 2008 by Major General Gadi Eisenkopf of the Israel Defense Force. He said what happened in the Dahia quarter of Beirut in 2006 will happen in every village from which Israel is fired on. We will apply disproportionate force on it and cause great damage and destruction. Well, disproportionate force is exactly what the law of war, humanitarian law, outlaws. War crimes are committed when disproportionate force is used. On the 6th of January 2009, during the military operations, Deputy Prime Minister Eli Yishai said, quote, "It should be possible to destroy Gaza so they will understand not to mess with us. It is a great opportunity to demolish thousands of homes of all the terrorists so that they will think twice before they launch rockets. I hope the operation will come to an end with great achievements and with the complete destruction of the terrorism and Hamas. In my opinion," he said, "they should be razed to the ground so thousands of houses, tunnels and industry will be demolished," unquote. Our investigation in fact showed that doctrine was applied in Operation Cast Lead. That is the issue that we investigated. The attacks on civilians during the ground war must also be evaluated in the light of those stated objectives. It explains, I would suggest, the high civilian death toll and the huge destruction of private homes. Over 5,000 homes completely destroyed, and estimates vary between 25,000 and 40,000 homes that were partially destroyed, both from the air and from ground attack. The attacks on the infrastructure of Gaza, over 200 industrial factories put out of action, most of them destroyed. The only flour producing factory put out of action. Most of the egg producing facilities of Gaza were completely destroyed with the killing of many, many thousands of chickens. Water supplies bombed. Water treatment plants bombed. Sanitation plants bombed with huge spillage in nearly 2 square kilometers of agricultural land. Agricultural farms bulldozed by Israeli tank bulldozers. And this applied to many, many square miles of farms. The effect on unemployment in Gaza is now over 60%. Latest estimates from reliable sources, some 90% of the people in Gaza live on less than $1 a day. Again, Minister of Welfare Isaac Herzog reported in Highlands. He severely criticised fellow cabinet ministers for making remarks during Israel's offensive in Gaza last winter, which Herzog, I'm quoting from which Herzog argues were used by the Goldstone Commission to demonstrate that Israel had knowingly planned to commit war crimes. Correct. Herzog aimed his criticism at Shas Chairman Eli Yishai and at Chaim Ramon, who served as Deputy Prime Minister during the offensive, saying that they had, quote, repeatedly voiced the need for harsh response to Gaza rocket fire. That strategy that was adopted by the Israel Defense Force completely undermines the norms of humanitarian law, the distinction between civilians and combatants. That is the essence of what war crimes are all about. Again, Israel has the absolute right and indeed duty to defend its citizens. I repeat, I think for the third time. But in doing so, its responses must be proportionate. That is the law. And up to now, that law has been accepted by Israel. Our methodology. We relied primarily on what we were told, what we heard with our own ears, and what we saw with our own eyes. It is a matter for deep personal regret that we were not informed of the version of the government of Israel and the Israeli Defense Force. Some groups, such as Magen David Adom, indirectly sent us information, and the team visited our staff in Geneva very late. But that was clearly no substitute for official assistance and the right to visit Israel and the West Bank. It makes the need for credible investigation all the more necessary and desirable. Let us put aside the specifics in our report for a moment and look at the larger issue. The fundamental organizing principle of international human rights is respect for human dignity. Attacks on civilians and civilian structures on both sides is the clear consequence of the dehumanization of each side by the other. You cannot treat people in that way if you regard them as worthy of respect as fellow human beings. As long as that continues, there cannot be any hope for peace in the Middle East. If you regard people as your equals, as equal human beings, you don't treat them in that way. You don't fire rockets at them, and you don't bulldoze their lands. It requires good and courageous leaders, I would suggest, to put a stop to it. As a South African, I know that peace can be achieved in just about any situation with good leadership. And I hope and pray that such leadership will emerge on both sides sooner rather than later. I can do no better at Brandeis University than to conclude with the words of Justice Louis Brandeis himself. He said, "The government is the potent, omnipresent teacher. For good or ill, it teaches the whole people by its example. Crime is contagious. If the government becomes a lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for law. It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy. To declare that the end justifies the means, to declare that the government may commit crimes, will bring terrible retribution."